900 years ago, the holy city of Jerusalem was conquered by Christianity's first crusade against Islam. The victorious Crusader knights occupied the Muslim holy sites, including the sacred Dome of the Rock and the nearby Al-Aqsa Mosque. The Crusaders believed the Al-Aqsa rested on the ancient remains of King Solomon's temple, and the knights who came to live there were known ever after as the Knights Templar. At the height of their power, the Knights of the Temple of Solomon were the elite military spearhead of the medieval Catholic Church. The knights were unique, both warrior and monk, utterly dedicated to killing and dying for their god. The Templars were the epitome of Christianity's crusade against Islam. The Knights Templar were not just frontline soldiers, they also constructed a remarkable supply and support network that enveloped every nation in Europe. The Templar network acquired vast business interests in farming, shipping, and banking, which eventually turned the order into the most powerful financial institution in Europe. In fact, the Order of the Temple of Solomon was the world's first multinational corporation. Just 200 years after its foundation, the Order's leaders were burned alive and its vast wealth seized. Were the Templars heretical devil worshippers or innocent victims of a greedy king? Their sudden destruction was so shocking to the people of Europe that, for centuries to come, legends would grow up around the remnants of the doomed order. Buried treasure, secret societies, the Turin Shroud, and even the Holy Grail would find their way into the folklore of the Knights Templar. Could any of these fantastic rumors possibly be true? And if so, who has kept their amazing secrets for the last 700 years?
Pope Urban II called what we now describe as a crusade in 1096, and as a consequence of that, Latin armies captured a number of key places in Palestine and Syria, including Jerusalem and the holy places. The problem was, however, that when the crusade was finished, many people left the East, having fulfilled their crusade vows, and returned to the West. And the Crusaders were left, the Crusade settlers were left with very little in the way of defences. But this didn't stop masses of pilgrims coming to the East, many of whom were unarmed, were elderly, were vulnerable, and needed to be defended. And in essence, really, the Templars were founded by a group of Western knights, French knights, who were living in the East, who wanted to engage in a charitable act and perhaps also ensure their own salvation by defending and protecting these groups of pilgrims who went to see the holy places. So in its simplest form, that's how they came into being.
The first Templars who dedicated their lives to God by protecting pilgrims in the Holy Land had to give up all their worldly possessions. They were proud of their poverty, and one of their seals shows two knights sharing a horse. The poor knights needed nothing to do God's work but a horse and a sword. It took 10 years of dedicated perseverance before the Pope officially recognized the Templars. In the year 1129, at the Council of Troyes in France, the Knights Templar became a monastic order of the Catholic Church, the Order of the Temple of Solomon. The Templars had become monks and joined their brothers, the Knights Hospitaller, protecting pilgrims as servants of God. But not everyone believed that it was possible to serve God as a warrior. In fact, some leading clerics believed the very idea to be an abomination. How could violence and the taking of human life be in any way reconciled with the teachings of Jesus Christ, who valued patience and understanding?
I think the reason that there was initially a rather ambiguous reaction towards the creation of the temple was that they were a quite unique creation, a combination of monk and warrior, which nobody had seen before. And many men in the 12th century were uneasy in the face of innovation, despite the fact that in many ways it was a very innovatory century in a wide range of intellectual and cultural fields. So they needed time to get used to it before they could perhaps fully recognize its value. So in the early years, the Templars didn't gain a great deal of support. But within about 20 years or so of their foundation, people began to adjust, and the voices against the order became fewer and fewer and less influential.
One of the most influential supporters of the Templars was the greatest church leader of the age, the Cistercian abbot Bernard of Clairvaux. Bernard saw the Knights Templar as more than warriors fighting the flesh and blood of Muslims. Bernard believed the Knights were fighting evil and were therefore purifying the Holy Land. In the eyes of the Church, the Knights Templar were not committing homicide, but malicide, not killing man, but evil itself. If a Templar died in battle, he would obtain eternal salvation and the remission of his sins. A Templar knight had no fear of death. There could be no higher motivation for a man to enter battle, and this, together with their strict discipline, would soon make the Knights Templar the most deadly fighting unit in the Crusader armies. In fact, the Templars were Europe's first professional standing army since the Romans.
It's important to notice that the Templar military function is central to the Crusader armies. The Templars were governed by a monastic rule which demanded obedience, and this enabled them to act in a structured and prearranged way in a battle situation. Here, in many ways, you have the origins of military discipline, and this made the Templars more valuable to the Crusader armies than perhaps their numbers might suggest.
The Templars had strict rules for their conduct on the battlefield. The Grand Master had to be obeyed whatever the circumstances. They could never leave the field if their black and white banner was still standing. Knights were not allowed to retreat unless outnumbered by at least 3 to 1. The order was forbidden to pay ransom, so there was no reason for a Muslim to take them alive. A knight of the Temple of Solomon would fight to the death. Templars newly arrived in the Holy Land were stationed at their headquarters in the Temple of Solomon, their name for the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The Templar compound included the mosque, the entire southern end of the platform on which it rested, and even below the platform's surface. Here, there was another mosque, the Maruni, where the Templars kept their horses and camels, and which the Crusaders believed to have been the stables of King Solomon. Today, the Maruni is rarely seen by non-Muslims. Although the Templars lived and worked in the sacred Islamic buildings, it was the Christian sites that they were there to protect. The most important Christian site of all was the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, built on Calvary, the rock on which Jesus Christ had been crucified. Today, the church still bears the myriad of crosses carved into the walls by these pious crusaders nearly 900 years ago. Beyond the relative safety of Jerusalem were the numerous biblical holy sites that required pilgrims to journey along lonely roads and through dangerous and inhospitable country. The Templars built fortifications and bases, set up patrols and provided beasts and supplies for weary pilgrims. It was not long before the discipline and skill of the Templar Knights demonstrated to all that they were capable of far more than just protecting pilgrims.
One of the most important early examples of Templar military skill is their role in the reorganisation and the protection of the army of King Louis VII of France during the Second Crusade, which in the course of 1147 to 1148 was trying the very difficult feat of crossing Asia Minor and was suffering both from the environment and from Turkish attack. The Templars were entrusted with reorganising the army and with defending it, and that enabled what was left of that army to cross Asia Minor without too many further mishaps. And that did greatly enhance the Templars' reputation.
The Second Crusade also saw the Knights Templar awarded the right to wear their distinctive red cross. The cross with its splayed ends was at the time unique to the Templars. Their flowing white robes and the red cross fueled their growing sense of collective identity. This military uniform was just one of the many innovative ways that the Knights Templar foreshadowed a modern army. Their main weapon, however, had been tried and tested over generations.
The cavalry charge was effectively their only offensive tactic. Now, of course, they developed other things to back this up. Infantry played an absolutely essential role because they provided the launch pad, the defended entity, even within an open battle, from which the armoured cavalry launched their charge. And they had other troops as well. They had light cavalry, the famous Turcopoles, and the Templars had all these units.
The Templars' famous Turcopoles were former Muslims who had converted to Christianity, and who, like the Templars themselves, could be counted on to fight to the death, as they also faced immediate execution if they were captured. Horses were vital to the Crusaders, not just for warfare, but for communications and transport. Templar care of horses was second to none, as they were expensive, did not live long, were particularly vulnerable to sickness in the Holy Land, and soon learned to fear battle. As a result, the decision to deploy a cavalry charge was not taken lightly, and Templar military policy in the Holy Land was, on the whole, cautious. As the skill and reputation of the Templars began to grow, so did their role in the overall defense of the Crusader states. In the second half of the 12th century, the Crusaders' 400-mile coastal strip of the Holy Land was based around the cities of Antioch, Tripoli, and the capital, Jerusalem. The Christians controlled the Mediterranean, which was vital for supplies, especially through the port of Acre. While mountains on the eastern frontier and the River Jordan provided excellent natural defenses. Castles and fortifications, many of them Templar, guarded the main entry points into the Christian states. Although the Christian sliver of the Holy Land was surrounded by Islam, political and religious divisions had prevented any unified attempt to drive the Christians out. When the Sunnis from Syria imposed their orthodoxy on Shia Egypt, the Crusaders faced a united Islamic frontier for the very first time. In 1178, the Templars began construction of a new castle at Jacob's Ford, where the main road from Cairo to Damascus crossed the River Jordan.
The most important road between Syria and Palestine passes very close to the castle. You can see it, you can still see it now. You can see the metal road, which leads from Palestine to the Golan Heights, and from there, hopefully, very soon to Damascus. This is the old Via Maris, which goes from Egypt to Damascus and crosses the Jordan in this crucial site. There are only a few hundreds of meters where the roads can cross the Jordan River. But until 1178, this crossing, this vadum, the fords of the Jordan were not protected by the Franks. In 1178, a year after a very decisive victory of the Franks over the Muslim enemies, the Knights Templars succeeded to convince the king to build a new castle very close to Damascus, 2 days walk from Damascus, and in a territory which was considered by both Franks and Muslims as a Muslim territory.
The Templars' newly built castle on the Jordan was in just too important a location for Saladin to do nothing. In the year 1179, he moved to destroy it. With so much at stake, the Templars had no choice but to abandon their policy of caution. They launched a relief expedition which Saladin intercepted and destroyed. The Grand Master, the highest-ranking Templar, was captured and later died in prison. Saladin's first great invasion of the Christian state came not long afterwards. The Templars once more put their faith in God and launched their heavy cavalry charge against a numerically superior enemy. The charge caught the Muslim forces by surprise and inflicted a crushing defeat. The Templars deployed the same proven tactics a few years later in 1187, when they discovered one of Saladin's armies had crossed the Jordan and was reconnoitring around the springs of Cresson. The Templars once more put their faith in God and launched a cavalry charge right into the heart of a Muslim force at least 3 times their size. This time, the cavalry failed. 60 Templar knights died and just 3 escaped the massacre.
The cavalry charge failed on almost every occasion. When it did fail, because it failed to hit its target. It just missed. And this is an absolutely fundamental point that has to be emphasized in military history. The cavalry charge was unstoppable, almost unstoppable, if it hit its target.
The Muslims' increasing ability to counter the Crusaders' offensive tactics was not enough to explain why God had apparently deserted his most loyal servants. Some Christians felt that Templar pride must be to blame. What the Templars saw as a noble collective spirit seemed to many to be merely arrogance and conceit. Some believed the Holy Land itself was now threatened by their godlessness. For the Muslims, their great victory at the springs of Cresson was a huge morale booster, and a few weeks later, Saladin assembled the largest ever Muslim army. By the end of June 1187, the Muslims had mustered an army of 45,000 men, including 12,000 light cavalry. The Crusaders had just over 20,000, including nearly 6,000 cavalry. On July the 1st, Saladin crossed the river Jordan and laid siege to the Christian-held city of Tiberias. The Christian leadership feared a trap, but finally, urged on by many, including the Templar Grand Master, they decided to try and relieve Tiberias. The Crusaders' dry and tortuous route would take them past a landmark hill called the Horns of Hattin. At the Horns of Hattin, Saladin's army was waiting. The Christians were enveloped and crushed. Thousands of Christians were killed and captured. Nearly all of the Crusaders were released for ransom, except for the Knights of the Military Orders, the Hospitallers and the Templars.
Following the Battle of Hattin, the captured members, or at least knights, of the temple, and I believe the hospital as well, were executed. Now this sounds incredibly brutal and ruthless, but I think what you have to bear in mind is that Saladin recognized that these were dangerous, dedicated, implacable foes.
As one Muslim chronicler put it, they were the fiery heart of the Frankish armies. They were the best disciplined, they were well equipped, they were committed, and they were permanent. And I think Saladin's aim there is really to try to eliminate what he saw as the core of the Frankish armies, so that in the future the land reconquered by the Muslims would remain in Muslim hands.
Saladin had also captured a large number of them, so executing them might, from his point of view, break the back of the organisation. It's not merely a matter of vengeance against a feared foe. In fact, I don't think it's even vengeance at all. This was a rather cold, calculating, and seen from a modern point of view, ruthless action, but it made sense at the time.
I also think that he executed the Templars and Hospitallers after the Battle of Hattin, and I think he did that also because it enhanced his own image as a holy war leader, as a leader of the jihad, and therefore somebody who's in the future a hero of Islam.
In the space of 6 months, half of the Templars' Holy Land army had been killed, and not a single fortification remained with a full garrison. The Order of the Temple of Solomon had lost 230 knights at Hattin and 60 at the Springs of Cresson. With the destruction of the Templar force, the mainstay of the Crusader state was gone. Saladin, having destroyed the Christian field army at Hattin, moved to capture the Crusader coastal ports to prevent any reinforcements getting through to the Christians by sea. 1 week after Hattin, Saladin captured the key port of Acre. His main army moved on south, and in October took Jerusalem itself. Over the next few months, Saladin recovered nearly all of the land lost to the First Crusaders almost a century before. Only the arrival of a German crusader, Conrad of Montserrat, at Tyre, prevented its fall. This toehold and a few meagre garrisons at Antioch and Tripoli were all that remained of a Christian Holy Land. On liberating Jerusalem, Saladin entered the Dome of the Rock and conducted a purifying ceremony. Rosewater was used to wash away all trace of the Crusaders who had defiled the holy site. The capture of Jerusalem was the crowning moment of a monumental career which had seen Saladin unite the Islamic world and drive out nearly all the Crusaders from the Holy Land. The Templars had been almost eliminated from the east, but incredibly, they had prepared themselves for a disaster on even this scale. Since their foundation, they had been constructing an enormous support network. This multinational corporation had headquarters in London and Paris and was built with one aim: to finance the Order's frontline operations in the east. The Templars would soon get their chance to begin the fight back. Saladin's victories had sent shockwaves through Christian Europe and ignited a fever of religious enthusiasm. The result would be the Third Crusade, which in the year 1189 would set out to recover the Holy Land.